Hello and welcome to a special festive episode of But Is It Gothic? I'm Mary and this is Lauren, and together we are your Ghoul Guides, and here we are going to be talking about everyone's, I was going to say everyone's favourite holiday, but I guess it's not really, it's not mine,
No.
but a holiday and why it's Gothic. So Lauren, what are you going to be arguing for us today and presenting the case that it's Gothic?
So, as it is right now, the month of December, I will be arguing that Christmas is Gothic.
Interesting.
We are not particularly festive people. I will admit that outright. It's not my favourite holiday. Halloween is, of course, better. But Christmas is still a really Gothic holiday. And what I want to argue is that whilst we might think of Christmas as being not a necessarily Gothic tradition, it actually really is. And I am going to attempt to prove it to you today.
Perfect. Well, I'm very excited to hear why Christmas is Gothic, because I love hearing about why anything is Gothic. And if you've watched any of our shows before, you'll know that Lauren's going to present her 3 strongest points. And then at the end, I will adjudicate and say whether I think you've proved your case or not. So with no more ado, Lauren, what is your first point?
All right. Well, Your Honour, adjudicate Mary. Okay, so my first point is that this is an incredibly supernatural story. Now, whether or not you believe in the nativity tale religiously, so whether or not you are a Christian, whether or not you believe that it's myth, whether or not you believe that it's legend, the story that we tell at Christmas is heavily supernatural. It is bathed in magic and mystery. We have a young woman who is supposedly a virgin, who is visited by an angel. Now, when we show this angel in children's nativity plays, we show usually a man, but sometimes a woman, though realistically probably an androgynous being, who takes on an incredibly beautiful appearance and tells the Virgin Mary that she will bear the Son of God. Angels, in reality, are absolutely fucking terrifying.
My favorite angels, and I've literally been talking to my mum about this, are Ezekiel angels.
Let's include Ezekiel angels in the nativity scene, because there's a lot of eyes, there's a lot of wings, but even then you have a supernatural being that is able to change its appearance and also deliver prophecies. So we've got the Immaculate Conception, we've got angels, we've got no room at the inn. Okay, so yes, this is not supernatural, but the fact that the nativity story is about these 2 people who need to make this long journey and they've only got a donkey and there's no room at the inn, this is very similar to like the plot of a Gothic novel. And that's because it's very similar to the plot of folklore, of myth, of legend. Like if we think about the Bible as an oral tradition, folkloric text being handed down, you know, this is a classic element, and these are the elements that made up the Gothic. Anyway, supernatural, Immaculate Conception, baby gets born. There's a star, there's wise men, there's angels, there's apparently animals singing depending on which school you went to.
Okay, yeah.
But, you know, even when we think about the stories that in the Bible that precede and follow the birth of Jesus, all of these stories that are tied to the nativity, you know, when they're hiding after Jesus is born from Herod, and you have the whole thing with the spider, this is an incredibly supernatural story. So whether or not you believe in Jesus as the Son of God and that this is the birth of the Son of God, if you are celebrating Christmas, what you're actually celebrating, if you're not celebrating it religiously, is a really crazy supernatural story. And what grounds itself in crazy supernatural stories that people use to understand and interpret human behavior? The Gothic.
And
So
I mean, it's also a chosen one narrative. Not exactly the same, but similar to the Terminator.
Yes. I mean, I'm not going to get into the whole messiahs, Christ figures, chosen ones. I'm not going to say debate, because it's not really a debate, but they're different archetypes that are connected.
That's a whole other video.
That whole video. This is a chosen one narrative. And this is also a narrative about, the birth of Christ is very closely connected to ideas of corrupt governments, corrupt societies. Mary and Joseph are going to take part in the census. It's a very boring legal story, essentially. Like, you've got this king who's like going to kill all these baby boys because he doesn't want to be overthrown by one of them eventually. This is a story of the supernatural. It's the story of human greed and avarice. It's a story of corruption. It's a story of morality versus, desire and greed, all packaged in a big supernatural bow. And I don't think it gets more gothic than that. Like, this in some ways is way more gothic than the stories behind Halloween. Like, this is a whole festival celebration based around the birth of a magic baby.
And technically the wise men and the magi aren't part of that nativity scene, because they actually rock up like when baby Jesus is like, an infant, a toddler. Yeah. But I think it is tied to this nativity thing. And you have that idea of these magi who have seen kinds of prophetic astrology, and they're here because this is like a monumentous supernatural event. And then also tied to that, you have all the things with Herod, like you say, like this kinds of insecurity and a need. I guess it's a kind of cleansing, and there is a slaughter of infants, and it's very violent and very dramatic and very gothic.
Exactly. And if you took out the Son of God narrative and you did this as like, there's prophecy that a baby's going to be born that is going to bring like peace and stability to this land, that is just a gothic novel. Like, that is like a Greek myth. That is like a Germanic folklore. Like, there's a lot of connections between the nativity and the story of Mithras, which is a later Greco-Roman deity. But ultimately, if we are talking about the actual biblical story that we every year force small children to take part in performing, that story is a Gothic tale.
I'm sold. You've convinced me on that point. Okay, what's next? What's point number 2?
Point 2. I'm glad you mentioned the Magi, because they lead me to my second point. This is a narrative of cultural appropriation. Christmas and the Christmas nativity story and what we consider to be Christmas is not one coherent narrative. Now, you're probably already aware of this because you might be aware of traditions like Epiphany. Or you might be aware of traditions like Santa Claus. So in some European countries, we celebrate on the 24th. And the 24th is when usually it's stockings, you have certain celebrations, you have things like the Kris Kringle, which I still don't fully understand, despite being made to stick sticks in an orange many times as a child. I didn't like oranges or raisins, so I don't think I was really listening, to be honest.
I'm not gonna lie, I don't know what this is.
Kris Kringle. Did you never make a Kris Kringle? It's like an orange, and I think it represents the world, and you wrap a ribbon around it and you stick like...
Oh, a Christingle.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
That thing.
I do know. Yeah, I do. I
promise I've done my research.
If anyone, I feel like if anyone of our American viewers are watching this, you'll probably be thinking, "What is a Christingle?" So if anyone is interested, then just please tweet us.
Yeah, you put a candle in it and you sing a song.
I can talk you through all the symbology. Yeah.
So yeah, you have like the Christmas Eve traditions, we have the Christmas Day traditions. In a lot of European countries, particularly in Catholic countries, you celebrate Epiphany on the 6th of January. This is also where the idea of the 12th night comes from. So if you're familiar with the Shakespeare play 12th Night, it's when, you know, things are turned upside down. You have traditions like you hide a small figurine in a bread or a brioche, whoever finds it is the king for a day. And this is because Epiphany is believed, imagined, regarded, however you want to term it, to be the day that the Magi, the wise men, arrive to the baby Jesus and they give their gifts. So we have like 2 to 3 weeks in which Christmas is a celebration. Now, for one thing, as most historians have agreed, baby Jesus was not born on the 25th of December.
I think it's the lambs and the shepherds that give it away.
Yeah. Also the star. It is not possible that the North Star is in the sky that brightly on the 25th of December.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't happen. Also, they're traveling to Bethlehem for the census. It is not the time of year that you would call a census. So for one thing, we know that, you know, if this is a true story, and, you know, some biblical scholars say, yes, this really happened, doesn't mean that it was the son of Christ. It just means that a man who became a prophet was born at this point in time. So we know for a fact Christmas, as in a period at the end of December, not actually the period of Jesus's birth. So why do we celebrate Christmas at Christmas? Well, that is because the spread of Christianity needs something to latch onto. Now, this is not a new thing. And this is something that I think a lot of primary education misleads us to. We get this idea that historical periods end and another one begins. So you're kind of taught the Egyptians happen, they end. The Greeks happen, they end. Then the Romans happen, they end. That's not what happens. You have all of these societies and all of these cultures living concurrently to one another. And of course, what happens? You try and conquer one another, particularly if you are the ancient Roman Empire. But Greece and Egypt do this too. Now, how do you establish control over a nation that you have just conquered and colonized? You reappropriate their traditions. Now, we see this with Greco-Roman gods. We see the same god reimagined multiple times. Now, whether or not this is enforcing your version of the god onto another, whether or not this is claiming the region's god as your own so that you claim their people into your own culture, whether or not this is a way to, you know, create control, it's hard to say in some cases, but we know that this is something that happens. We reappropriate, and that's how we maintain control. This is a really important concept in post-colonial Gothic. But this is something that's been happening for thousands of years, and Christmas is no different. The Roman Empire then becomes the Byzantine Empire, and increasingly we get empires based around the concept of Christianity. And as Christianity spreads across the world, when it comes across a culture, it, instead of trying to replace their traditions with their own, takes them on. And we can say the same for Easter, we can say the same for a lot of our saints' days, but particularly Christmas. Now, the end of winter is a really significant time, particularly in a lot of Eastern and Western European cultures. We have things specifically like Yuletide. Now, this is something that we're still aware of. We have a Yule Log. Every year at Christmas, you get a nice chocolate Yule Log. And that's because Yuletide, or the Yule, it's called lots of different things. I'm not going to attempt Scandinavian pronunciation because I definitely can't do it. So I'm going to just call it Yule. But essentially what happens is Christmas just takes the place of these other things. So we get two things. We get a really, really meta narrative where everything is squished together into one nice, sustainable 2 to 3 week period. Because, as you said, the wise men, the magi, whatever we want to call them, they don't turn up until much later. And they're also kind of like strange figures. Are they scholars? Are they astronomers? Are they magicians? What is the purpose of these gifts? Where do they come from? What's their significance? They have been, whitewashed over generations. They originally don't come, they travel a really long way. Like they come from various different regions. So we, on the one hand, have this really meta narrative that to get ourselves with a nice, easy story to tell, we pick and choose and we tie it all together, and the original narrative is lost. That is something that the Gothic does. It's an incredibly unreliable narrative. Now, we could say this for the Bible itself, because it's a bunch of stories that have been knitted together with bits left out. I'm sorry, it's true. Don't at me. Or do at me. You know what? I like to talk about this stuff. Maybe do at me. So on the one hand, it's an incredibly meta thing. On the other hand, it's massively cultural appropriation. And one of the things that the Gothic does again and again is appropriate. It appropriates aesthetics, it appropriates archetypes, and it does appropriate cultures. This is why we have horror movies about voodoo, because there's a fear of the other, there's orientalization. But one of the things that the Gothic always does is appropriate, and Christmas is a story of appropriation. It is,
and even this narrative of appropriation, I feel like has become a narrative in itself, in that civilized Christian Romans came over to pagan Britain, who
and they
were involved
slaughtering
with
goats and putting blood on twigs, and they were like,
human sacrifice, animal sacrifice, and they came and they spread this civilized religion. And that's not really what happened. It's like what you said, like it's a kind of enmeshing of different cultures. And it was kind of like, oh, you're celebrating Yuletide, or you've got these like winter solstice celebrations. How about Christmas?
You can still have your holiday. We're not going to take your holiday from you. Just maybe instead of Odin, you worship this baby. And a lot of the traditions that we still have. So I mentioned the Yule Log. So the Yule Log is still something that we have. We still think of Christmas fires. You burn a fire at Christmas. Christmas dinner. Yuletide was a feasting celebration. It also had traditions like wassailing, which is where things like Christmas caroling come from. Even the Christmas tree. The Christmas tree comes from Germany, famously brought over to Britain by Queen Victoria's husband Albert, although that is kind of contested, but popularized. Some historians believe that the Christmas tree comes from the tradition around Yuletide. You slaughtered a goat, you took its blood, and you smeared it on the sacrificial twigs. So we have twigs that are built, put together, and then decorated. It's kind of like a Christmas tree. So a lot of the traditions that we have actually come from these pre-Christian holidays that have been appropriated and made a part of Christmas. Which leads me to my next point.
Great. I have to say, your second point, I'm definitely convinced even more. Yeah,
like
ticking all the boxes.
These are kind of some of the standard parts of the Gothic. We've got the supernatural, we've got appropriation, we've got like contested, unreliable meta-narratives.
So your third and final point.
My third and final point, Christmas is hella freaking weird and creepy.
Yes, it is.
So, because of the supernatural mystical elements of Christmas, because of the meta-narrative and the appropriation, we now have a bunch of really weird, amazingly creepy Christmas traditions. So we have Santa Claus. Santa Claus brings children presents. Now, Santa Claus can be traced to a number of different elements. Santa Claus originally did not wear red. That was popularized by Coca-Cola, which, I mean, corporate capitalism, the Gothic loves to get its teeth into that. But there's a lot of other figures. So Santa Claus, for example, St. Nicholas, Santa Claus. In some cultures, he has a friend. And this friend is often Krampus. So whereas Santa Claus or Saint Nick is a kindly fellow who visits good children and rewards them for behavior, Krampus is a demonic, hairy-looking goat man. Often. Now, who else is a demonic, hairy-looking goat man often? The devil! We love to imagine demonic, evil figures as creepy, hairy-looking goat men, which, again, dates to pre-Christianity and the idea of monstrousness. But Krampus, really, you've probably seen Krampus horror movies. Krampus has become incredibly popular, particularly in the last few years, because it's a really fun idea that there is this dark kind of alternative to Christmas. Now, in some cultures as well, Krampus and Saint Nick are the same thing. You know, in some mythologies, in some tellings, they're like two sides of the same coin rather than being two different entities. But they're not the only ones. In Wales, you have, and I'm going to try and get this right, the Merian, which is a horse-like creature with a skull that wears a white sheet. And this,
fabulous.
Yeah, this goes into the wassailing tradition. So instead of a Christmas caroller coming in singing Christmas carols at your door, you get the Merian, who is like, let me in your house, and you have to come up with a good reason not to let it in your house. You also have traditions like the Dead Moros, which is a Slavic pre-Christian tradition that probably inspires creatures and kind of figures like St. Nicholas. He is a winter wizard who visits children and brings them presents. So we have some nice ones like the Dead Moros. We have some kind of creepy looking but not necessarily evil ones like the Merian. We also have the more kind of devilish ones like Krampus, and some of the fun ones that I think I want to mention here because I think they actually influence certain traditions that we still have from Yuletide and things like that. So we have a monster called, I believe, the Straggle, which is Straggele. And they kind of look like the monsters from Where the Wild Things Are. Like they're horned, big, kind of like troll-like creatures. And they come, I believe they are from places like Scandinavia. They kind of go along, so like with the kind of idea of things like trolls from Norway. So we're talking about that kind of Nordic tradition.
They sound delightful.
They're amazing. And their whole thing is that they come out and they're basically looking to feed. So if you don't leave food out for them, they might eat you instead. What do we leave out on Christmas Eve? Food for Santa and his reindeers, because we want him to give us presents.
Santa and his reindeers, or for some Scandinavian trolls.
We also have things like the Nisse or the Tomaton, which again are these gnome-like creatures who, if you are not kind to them, might kill your livestock. But they are these little dudes with long red pointy hats who, if you are good to them, help you make things and keep things. And you also have to give them things like food. What does Santa have? Little elves. They obviously are not like your Lord of the Rings elves. They're not like tall and willy-willy and beautiful. But they are more like gnomes or, you know, the elves and the shoemaker type fairies. So you have figures like this with their red little pointy hats. And I'm sure you've all seen Christmas decorations of Santa's elves looking like this. And you have things like the Yule cats, which again, I'm not going to attempt the Nordic pronunciation because it's very long and difficult, but you have all of these across particularly like Europe and Russia. You have all of these traditions of creatures that if you're not given new clothes at Christmas, they're gonna tear you apart. If you don't leave food out, if you are naughty instead of nice, if you're gonna get, some of them they leave presents at windows, but if you're bad, you get a potato, or you get ripped into.
I love that so many of these creatures and these stories are centering around food.
Yes.
Which I think is great. But also they have that whole kind of like duality and that carrot and the stick thing, where it's exactly. Like, if you're nice, if you're nice, you'll get nice things, or maybe you'll get presents, or maybe good things will happen to you. But if you're bad, if you're naughty, maybe you'll get dragged off in someone's sack and killed and beaten to death, or maybe you'll get potatoes.
So, and this is the thing, it's a tradition to give new clothes at Christmas. It's tradition to wear a new outfit on Christmas. It's tradition to give presents. It's tradition to feast. And almost all of these traditions come not from necessarily celebrating the birth of either a really supernatural magical baby or the Son of God, depending on what you believe, but from older traditions like Yuletide. So, and some of them are real scary. The Mary Clud, I think, is one of my favorites because it just looks so weird. And I feel like Welsh folklore doesn't get enough love. But the Straggle are also really cool. And there are like numerous instances across the world of winter solstice related creatures that have masks that are, covered in sticks and fur that will come and will eat you or drag you away if you don't leave them out things like food. And it's really fascinating to see how these have become a part of Christmas. So next time you're singing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, think about that because it's really, really creepy. Also, final point, Santa, the idea that Santa watches you while you sleep terrified me as a child. And obviously because, yes, this idea of Santa Claus, this is not it's not connected to the Christian tradition. It's connected to older ideas like Yuletide. But just in of itself, so much about Christmas is really scary. And that's why we tell ghost stories at Christmas. Ghost stories are, particularly in the British tradition, a key part of the Christmas celebration. On Christmas Eve, you gather round and you tell ghost stories. And this is, again, partly related to these terrifying pre-Christian customs. So I think, again, just my final point, the fact that we have so many traditions globally that are about scaring the shit out of ourselves at Christmas and then rewarding ourselves with food and drink is really, really gothic. The majority of our Christmas traditions are linked to these ideas that would come to feed what will become and has become the very foundations of the Gothic tradition. And the fact that we read these fireside ghost stories, and that this is, if you look at the Victorian period, we have magazines published, especially at Christmas, that are full of some of the creepiest ghost stories that I've ever read in my life, particularly Mary Elizabeth Braddon's. They are fantastic. And if you're looking for some creepy Christmas reading, I highly recommend those.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for a well-argued case. And I'm glad that you managed to talk about ghost stories at the end, because for me, that is one of the best parts of Christmas, is thinking about all these, creepy-ass Victorian ghost stories. But I feel like that needs to be its whole other video because
yes,
there's so many.
And I think that's maybe like a future Ghoul School episode, is like the ghost story tradition as a Christmas thing, because it's so complex and it's so interesting, and I can't do it justice in that type of argument. But
what you did talk about, I think, was super interesting, and I love that whole kind of supernatural foundations of the Christian story, the kind of appropriation and reappropriation, and that meta-ness of what we think about as Christmas now, and those kinds of how it's evolved, and then just like you say, all of the other, there's a whole menagerie of weird supernatural Christmas, Yuletide, Festivus,
and that we still, even if we put all of that aside, that we have a apparently jolly red man who watches us while we sleep and then comes into our house and drinks our sherry and eats our mince pie.
No, thank you. Okay. So that's your case.
That's my argument.
Case. Now we come to the judgment. So are we convinced that Christmas is Gothic? Let me think. Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, you win. Case well argued. So well done. Congratulations, Lauren. I guess
it means a lot to me.
A prize. I don't know what you win. We still haven't figured that out yet.
No.
But I hope you like the nice food. I don't have any food to give you, Christmas food, as I would reward you. But please just enjoy the nice feeling that
Thank you. I do like to win.
yeah, you won. And okay, and thank you to everyone. If you're still with us, thank you for watching another episode of But Is It Gothic? Please let us know if you agree with Lauren's case that Christmas is Gothic. Comment below, or you can tweet us at the Ghoul Guides. And until next time, stay safe and stay spooky.